Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from rock and roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded from the old Rock House in St. Louis, Missouri, here's your host, Aaron Perlut.
Welcome back to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aaron Perlut, and while normally we record from the old Rock House, today we are not. My guest is singer-songwriter Steve Forbert. His first four albums charted on the Billboard 200 in 1979. He had a huge radio hit in Romeo's Tune. In 2004, his record Any Old Time was nominated for a Grammy Award. And he's had songs that have been recorded by Marty Stuart, Keith Urban, and Rosanne Cash, among others. Plus, he's got a new record out. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hey, exactly where are you? Glad to be here.
Well, today I'm in St. Louis, but I'm kind of a moving target always.
Where the Rock House is in St. Louis?
Yeah, it's one of the great music venues in St. Louis, especially if you're looking for kind of that Americana alt country sound.
I played there.
Yeah. Great spot. So I appreciate you being on the show today, and I'd love to kind of walk through your career. And I know you're originally from Meridian, Mississippi, and it just so happens I've spent time in Meridian, Mississippi. I would love to just let you talk a little bit about your career and the arc of it.
Well, there is no arc. It's straight up. Bang, zoom, to the moon, Alice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really curious about how you originally got into music. A lot of people originally get into it through church, through growing up, through their parents, what have you. What was your inspiration that originally kind of catapulted you into becoming a professional musician?
I'm a song guy. And I think from earliest way back on, I remember records like The Rhythm of the Rain by the Cascades. And I was just always interested in hearing those lyrics and the melody. And as time went by, I listened to, like anybody, to the AM radio. And I was just soaking up those songs. And then when this folk rock thing hit, it really it caught my interest. We'd be talking about, of course, Mr. Tambourine Man. And we'd be talking about Sounds of Silence and all those things that began to happen with more poetic lyrics. And that really caught my attention. So I like the Beatles, and everybody loves I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You, of course. But it was that more poetic side of things that really got me going.
Who would you suggest are your kind of greatest influences that really spoke to you when you started becoming a songwriter?
Well, obviously, Bob Dylan opened the horizon for everybody interested in this subject. And then I really liked Jackson Browne's first record before he got to be more of a amphitheater artist. There was a lot of charm on that first record. And there's really no better complete album than Sweet Baby James by James Taylor. Those things come to mind. I was listening to everybody from Leonard Cohen to all the way to an obscure artist like a songwriter David Ackles.
And I know that early on in your career, you were actually compared to Bob Dylan, which seemed to kind of annoy you, which is, it's like someone being compared to Jesus. It just, it's one of those things where it's almost embarrassing, but it seemed to almost agitate you. Was it frustrating or just almost embarrassing just because it's Bob Dylan?
Yeah, I just felt that it was, I just felt that there might be people who felt that it presented a set of criteria that I might have to live up to, and so much of that Bob had already done. And there was, so I'm not going to be the first person to put weird photographs on the cover of my record, like, shall we say, Bringing It All Back Home, or name songs that don't, with weird titles like Rainy Day Women number 12 and 35. What the fuck is that? It should be called Everybody Must Get Stoned, obviously, but no. So it's like, so much has been done of it. I'm just trying to write the best songs I can and make what's become known as Americana music. So I just, you know what? I'll be ridiculous here, and I'll quote Bob. I got nothing, Ma, to live up to. I just didn't want that mantle, if you will, And on the other hand, you knew that it was rather a tired cliche. It had been said about John Prine and Elliot Murphy and Bruce Springsteen, and the list had gone on. So it was a handy handle for people, but I just didn't like the side of it that could be taken remotely, literally.
Yeah.
So that's what I bristled at.
You had such great success when you kind of coming out of the gate in the late 70s with your first couple albums. Does that create also, much like the comparison to Dylan, does that create unreal expectations for you as an artist that are somewhat intimidating as you move forward and try to create new art?
No, when that sort of thing happens to you, you don't know any better. You haven't been through it. It doesn't create challenges. In fact, it's more likely to give you a false sense of security. Like, oh, well, second record had almost a top 10 record and selling some records and touring. And now we're going to Japan and, this is going really well. Okay. I've got this. It's like, well, maybe you don't, so it doesn't, you don't say, I've got another hit and worry about it. Yeah. I mean, I've got to have another hit and worry about it. You just kind of think that, it's all going to be that simple. I had a song called It Isn't Going to Be That Way, which was on the first record. And it was a bit fortuitous. But I still, I love that song and we got a great recording of it. But that's kind of became the reality, is that it's not quite this easy.
Yeah. At what point did that set in for you where you're like, oh shit, it's hard. This is a hard business to succeed in on a long-term basis?
Well, we're talking about getting things on the radio and selling a lot of records. And so obviously, Aaron, I mean, by the third record, I would say that we might have done a little better if we put a song called Song for Katrina out as the first single. It's all about those singles.
Yeah.
A single is a tailor-made, perfect, existing textbook definition of a way to promote an album. For those of you who remember albums out there, so that's what it is. I mean, where would The River have been without Hungry Heart? You had to have Hungry Heart. So, in my defense, I think maybe we could have picked a better single for the third record. But we, without that built-in commercial for the album, we didn't hit those sales. And so that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, which is interesting because, so many things have changed in the past, 40 years in the music industry. But if there is one thing that's actually remained consistent, it's the importance of those singles. Because in fact, people are now simply just dropping singles because consumers don't have the patience to listen to an entire record for some godforsaken reason.
Right. Well, if the single has got what it takes, then there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of Foster the People, that hit song they had. What was it called? That was such a winner for them.
Yeah.
It's all about that single.
Yeah.
It's called something like Kicks. What was it? Do you know that record?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. It's escaping me right now, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Let me ask you something else. A lot of people don't know this, but you actually ended up in a incredibly famous music video. In fact, one of the ones that really kind of catapulted MTV to what it was in the 80s and early 90s. How did you end up in Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun? That seemed like a really entertaining opportunity for you.
Well, Cyndi Lauper was in a group called Blue Angel, and they were playing around the New Jersey area and New York area. And I was a music fan, and I went to hear them a few times, and it was pretty clear that she was a distinctive talent. And I got up in like the fast lane here in Asbury Park and sang a couple of Little Richard songs with them. So I was having the hit with Romeo's tune around those times, and she knew that I was a fan of hers and liked her. And when she went solo, and they started to make one of these new concept video promotional tools, she knew that if she asked me, I had some notoriety at that time. If she asked me to be in, I did say yes. So that's the way it happened, was because I just been onto aware of her talent when she was in Blue Angel.
Yeah, and
all the other kids with their pumped up kicks. That's the record I'm talking about. From
Pumped Up Kicks, yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Great record. But that's what you need.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry, let's do one more. Owl City. I like to believe that I like to make myself believe the world turns slowly. What was the name of that one? Something about butterflies, or it was an incredible big hit, but there you go. That's what Owl City will be remembered for. Yeah. I'm changing the subject because I'm a pop music fan, but go ahead.
It's all good, Steve. Another thing that happened, I guess not long
I'm sorry. Hey, man, it's Fireflies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So not long after you were actually in that video, and this is not unusual for when record companies had, far more power over artists, but you ended up having a disagreement with Nemperor, who was your record company early on in your career. And it got in the way of you actually being able to record for a couple of years. This was, I guess, in the mid 80s. That must have been remarkably frustrating for you.
Well, let me make this clear. I'd never had a disagreement with Nat Weiss at Nemperor Records. Nemperor was a custom label affiliated with the Epic side of CBS. Okay. I never had a problem with Nat. I had a contract with him to make 4 records, which I did. And Nat Weiss was a wonderful freaking person. He's passed away now. I wish he was still here. He was a wonderful person to know. But we never had a problem. I think it was convenient for him that I decided I would try to move over to Columbia after making my 4th record. And he was probably about ready to get out of the record label gig, because he discontinued Nemperor Records, and that was it. So I don't think that was a problem for him that I wanted to move to Columbia, but there were mixed signals through my management that created a brick wall with Columbia. So really, it doesn't have anything, Aaron, to do with Nemperor Records. Gotcha. I can't say enough good about the late Nat Weiss.
Yeah. And that was that also about the time that you relocated to Nashville, looking for kind of different creative opportunities there?
I moved to Nashville in 85 because there was some nice, interesting things happening there for about 30 seconds or really a year, where they were signing a whole lot of singer-songwriters thinking that was the way to go, and that was really interesting. Everybody from Nancy Griffith to Lyle Lovett to Foster and Lloyd to Mary Chapin Carpenter was having top 5 country hit records. It was, of course, very interesting to me because these were effectively people that were, you might call them Americana artists, or you might call them singer-songwriters. I mean, that's what Lyle Lovett is. So all of that was attractive. So It was in 85 that I went down there to be a part of that.
Yeah, that was actually around the time also that Chris Hillman, who's been on the show, who was one of the founders of the Byrds and the Burrito Brothers, he actually also ended up moving into Nashville and had quite a few hits with
Desert Rose Band
and solo there. but
Yeah.
there was a time where he did quite well there. Ultimately, you ended up with Geffen Records, though, which is, at the time must have been a pretty good place to be, I would imagine.
Yeah, there are a lot of benefits to that. And I made 2 records for them. But then they became more and more of a rock label. And that became really seemingly the real force of the label, with groups like obviously Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith and those kind of things. So I began to feel less at home there because of that. But I made Streets of This Town and of the American of Me and released them on Geffen.
Talk a little bit about the when you put out Any Old Time, because that ultimately got nominated for a folk music Grammy, and that must have been a really great experience for you. Just writing that album. I mean, it was so well received critically.
Well, I didn't write that album.
Okay.
It's a tribute to Jimmy Rogers.
Right.
So it was all selections from the Jimmy Rogers catalog. Jimmy Rogers, father of country music, America's blue yodeler, the singing brakeman, that guy who died in 1933 at the age of 35 from freaking tuberculosis. He died in 33 at the age of 35. TB was killing him the whole time he was famous. It's an extremely dramatic melody. It's a heavy emotional story, fascinating. So I did a tribute to him, and I must add that I'm from his hometown, Meridian, Mississippi. So that's where it was all. That's what it was all about. It was almost like an obligation after I'd made several folk rock albums to acknowledge being from Jimmy Rogers' hometown, because he's the father of country music and started so much of what we're all still loving today.
The name you hear more often than not is obviously Hank Williams Sr. Jimmy really does not get a tremendous amount of credit in terms of being a driving force behind you're absolutely right, what has become Americana music. And there's so many challenges today trying to label a music style. It gets a little bit confusing.
Well, the problem there is the technical. There's a funny thing. It's like World War II created a demarcation. It's anything before World War II recorded before World War II, Aaron, is likely going to be in one microphone, maybe in a proper studio in Camden, New Jersey for RCA Victor, or somewhere in New York City, or maybe field recordings like the way they recorded Robert Johnson. And Ralph Pierce set up a recording facility and recorded people famously in Bristol, Tennessee, and discovered the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers in the same 3 days. But those recordings, you can't do a lot with them. You can't remaster them. You can't. Whereas Hank Williams Sr. recorded in a radio station initially in Nashville, and there's a certain bump up after World War II of recording quality. That's a loose, choice of a point in time. But you can still hear a Hank Williams record, and they can clean it up maybe and all, and it's quite presentable on any radio station today. I mean, sonically.
Yeah.
So those records work for people, whereas Jimmy's are they're old timey. Period.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that must have been kind of did you find that a therapeutic experience? Paying that homage to Jimmy Rogers, and then also seeing how well received it became?
Well, I thought it was great, and it was nice. I took my girlfriend Diane out to L.A. for the Grammy ceremony. I knew that year that for traditional folk album, June Carter had just passed away, and she'd also released a record not long before that. and it was a very good record. So I knew she was likely to win, but it was fun to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of therapeutic, in a couple years ago, you actually wrote a memoir, Big City Cat: My Life in Folk Rock. You know, I don't know about you, but when I tend to kind of go back and write things about myself, it's and even songwriting, I find it to be incredibly therapeutic. It's like almost a kind of a healing session. I know this was coming right off of your, not long after your cancer diagnosis as well. But what did you, as you were kind of going back through, you know, your 40-year career in music, what did you find that maybe you had taken for granted? I mean, was there something that came out of that said to you, wow, you know, this has been a pretty good career I've had?
Honestly, from things I've read, to jump to an entire different level of notoriety, Keith Richards has said he had a really hard time after going through his whole life and writing that book that he did. And I feel more like that. It just brings you face to face with things you coulda, shoulda, woulda. You look back on all of this, and unless you're like Paul McCartney, you're probably going to have a lot of things that you wish you had done differently. Maybe he does even himself. But you know, it didn't make me feel better to look back on it all. It just made me more self-critical, God damn it, really, to be honest. So that's the answer to your question. You know, Keith said it took him months to get over the intense feelings of all that. He's like, wow, look at all these insane things I did. Wow.
I've actually read Keith's book too. The interesting thing about Keith's book, I thought, was that all the press that came out when his book first was released was that Keith had said bad things about Mick Jagger. And after I read the book, I'm like, he wasn't terribly critical of Mick in that book. They just talked about their life together for 50 years, which, like any partnership, has its ups and downs. But to go back to yours, what did you find that, was there anything specific that you found that made you significantly regretful as you look back in your career, things you could have done differently?
Well, I hesitate to dwell on negative things. I'm still alive and I'm talking to you right now. And, you know, if you read the book, it's all in there. And I didn't really love the celebrity thing. People still are surprised to find out that there was a point when Romeo's tune took off that I rejected being on the cover of Rolling Stone. But that's the way I felt at the time. And here today, I think I was right. Because it's just really strange when you're just trying to deal with fame at age 23 or whenever you would. You can't be prepared for that.
Yeah.
You know, spring training ain't going to do it. You just, you know. And so I was getting enough of it, and it was creating a barrier between me and the real world. And I just didn't like that. That was one thing that was kind of strange about it all to me.
Yeah. So you've also got a new record out, Moving Through America. Talk a little bit about this record and the mindset you had going into writing it, and really what it ultimately became about.
Well, the mindset of it is to write the best songs I can. And in this case, honestly, Aaron, I'm 67. I was 65 and 6 working on this album with producer Steve Greenwell here in his studio, which is where I am now in Asbury Park. And it's just become in my 60s, I tend to talk more about third-person characters. You know, I'm not in Grand Central Station anymore singing to get out of the cold with an open guitar case, you know, and I'm not on the road for the first time writing songs like I'm an Automobile or, you know, these songs of seeing a visitor and all the things that were on my third record, which were just about the the wide-eyed experience of seeing the world, going around the block for the first time. So now this new record has a lot of character studies. I put a lot of work into them, and I'm able to express my own points of view, but through sketches, song, lyrical portraits of other people. Some, I kind of even, make them up. They don't really exist. Something like there's a song called Times Like These about a homeless person who's looking at a new place down by the river where they can kind of, hole up, making a little camp there till they get run off. And there songs like Tribute to Tom Petty about Gainesville, Florida, and the orange groves that, it's where all the orange juice came from till California got the upper hand. But those things are all over this new record, Moving Through America.
Yeah, and it's a really nice record. I mean, I've listened to it all the way through.
Thank you.
And it's got what I find just enjoyable about it is you have this kind of this very artful but lighthearted way of creating these character sketches, and it doesn't seem like you're taking yourself too seriously, but it's just, I mean, it's most, and I find this with most of your music, it's just very enjoyable, pleasant, and it honestly makes you feel good, quite frankly.
Well, I'm proud of that. I'm incorrigible, and I do have a certain, even in tough times, I kind of tend to bring a certain buoyancy to the songwriting. And I'm happy about that. I don't see any point in bringing people down and creating too dark of a picture. I just don't. So thank you for that. There is kind of a particular thing, that I'm doing. It's like a purple wire connected to an orange wire. If you're one of those people, you might find it is a good thing to tune into. And there is a certain, I don't know, keep at it and enjoy life thing about it to me.
Yeah, and quite frankly, there's just not a lot of that today. I mean, I've got a friend who runs barbecue festivals because he said nobody wants to go to a barbecue festival to be pissed off. They want to go have a good time. And I think we all could use a little bit more of that. So, and the new record is Moving Through America is certainly one of those.
Thank you.
Steve, it's been a real privilege and fun having you on the show today. I appreciate it. Are you going to be out on the road over the next year promoting the album? Absolutely.
I just did 12 dates in the UK. I was over there for 20 days. That was an adventure. And I have plenty of things. If you just check the old Facebook thing, we're fixing to do Asbury Park very soon. We're fixing to do Pittsburgh. We're fixing to do Staunton, Virginia. We're fixing to do Rockville. Don't go back to Rockville. Well, I am going back to Rockville. And there's plenty of things already arranged. So the answer is yes.
Fantastic. All towns that I have been to, especially Asbury Park, because my wife is from Neptune right next door. So
right. And you've actually spent time in Meridian, Mississippi. So
I have spent time in Meridian. I've followed you all around the country somehow.
Okay.
Don't get creeped out. All right, Steve Forbert, thank you so much for being with us on the Loadout Music Podcast. It's been a real treat.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.